Please join me in prayer. Holy Spirit, as you open this place to us, open also each of us to one another and to you. And may we hold the door open for any you send our way. Amen. For today's sermon, I'm going to be focusing on the Acts reading, at least for the details, although if you were paying attention for the second reading, those themes are going to be strong as well, I hope. But the Acts reading focuses on this sort of one-off character in the New Testament, the Ethiopian eunuch. Now, I assume we all know what an Ethiopian is. Someone who comes from Ethiopia, a region of northeast Africa. Ethiopia is actually the first kingdom historically that converted to Christianity. Maybe this story is connected to that story. I didn't have time to research it. But I know that back then it was known as the Kingdom of Axum, and it was the first kingdom to convert to Christianity. And I've never been to Ethiopia, but I'd love to go. I don't know if you've been. But there is a form of Christianity there that is ancient and has not changed as much as some forms historically. But it's its own unique Ethiopian Christianity. And so you can go to Ethiopia and you can find, a monastery that's 1,800 years old or a church that's 1,700 years old practicing this Christianity that might start with this eunuch. The second term, eunuch, in Greek eunuchos, means a bed keeper or a bed guardian, or a harem keeper or a harem guardian. And so this was someone that a person in power would trust with what they valued, whether it was their immediate family, their spouse and their children, or their harem. There are many other spouses and concubines. This is someone that they would trust with these people in their lives. And this was because a eunuch was not competing with them for the attentions of, say, their wife or their concubines. Now, eunuchos is a word that could mean a lot of things in the ancient world. It doesn't mean just one thing, the way it kind of does in English when we translate it. Eunuchos is a term that was used broadly to refer to people we might call now gender or sexual minorities, basically meaning that huge catchment basket of all the people who are men but don't practice masculinity the way that the majority does, or who are women and don't practice femininity the way the majority does. We have a lot more nuance. We have many more terms for folks like this, but in the ancient world, the term used broadly was eunuchos. And this isn't just me going off on a tangent. Robert Gagnon, a professor of New Testament at Pittsburgh, who is, I think it's fair to say, very far to the right, politically and theologically, agrees. He makes the same argument that eunuchos meant, in the ancient world, a catch-all phrase for gender and sexual minorities. And the reason, as I said, why you would choose someone who is a eunuch, or in some cases harm them and make them a eunuch, was that you could trust them with your spouse, your concubines, and your other, as we can see with the Queen of Ethiopia, your other valuables. This Ethiopian eunuch was literally a godsend to Philip. This was absolutely Philip set up to succeed. Literally a godsend, as Philip is drawn in this direction and then pointed at that guy in that chariot to go talk to him. And this guy in this chariot just happens to be coming from Jerusalem where he was worshiping, and he's reading a precious Isaiah scroll, which I think is one of the thickest scrolls in the Hebrew scriptures. And it would have been almost priceless. Someone trained their whole lives as a scribe to be able to copy this text from another scroll perfectly, without error, with as few errors as possible. And this Ethiopian eunuch got his hands on this scroll somehow, and he's reading it. He's reading it aloud. Back in the ancient world, if you were reading, you wouldn't be reading to yourself quietly the way we might. You would read aloud. So he was reading aloud, and Philip hears him, and it's just set up for him perfectly. This person is interested in Yahweh already. He's asking about Isaiah. He's open to hearing about Jesus, and he's immediately caught up and excited. And in his excitement, he says, well, here's a puddle, here's a pond, here's a body of water. What is to stop me from being baptized right now? And he turns to Philip, and Philip gives him his answer. As I said, the verse 37 is in brackets, and if you have a study Bible, it might say that verse was added a little bit later. But even if we take that added verse, right, what Philip demands of the eunuch is minimal. Basically, he says, if you trust what I've told you, then we can baptize you right now. All you have to do is trust. And then the Ethiopian eunuch gives a statement that is far from a complete, robust, doctrinal statement. He basically says, yeah, I believe in Jesus, let's do this. So they do. And now, because this is where one of the ways the church started, we, of course, now in 2021 have gotten past all of these issues that come up about nationality and race and ethnicity and gender and sexuality, right? We've resolved all these things because here's Philip welcoming someone different from him in all these ways with very little fuss. I mean, I'm being sarcastic. We still struggle with these things today. If anything, it's worse now than it was then, which is alarming given this is a 2,000-year-old story. As I said, the Ethiopian eunuch is basically handed to Philip. I described it at the earlier service as T-ball for Philip. Like it's right there on the tee, and he just has to knock it out of the park, right? And that's because the Ethiopian eunuch is not being tested in this story. When he asks, why can't I be baptized right now? What's stopping me? There's nothing inside him that's stopping him. He's not looking inward and thinking, oh, can I be baptized? Am I ready? Do I know enough? Am I worthy? He isn't asking any of those questions, nor is God being tested. The two of them aren't waiting for God to give an answer, to strike the eunuch down or propel him toward the water. This isn't a test for the eunuch. It's not a test for God. It's a test for Philip. And through Philip, it's a reflection of a test for us. The Ethiopian eunuch is asking Philip, and through the text, us, what is to prevent me from being baptized? And then Philip has to answer. Most of my time as a pastor has been in transitional ministry. You may recall, in ancient times, I even came to First Presbyterian Church as a transitional leader, as a transitional minister for my first 4 years here. And my position before that was interim, so transitional. And my position before that was also a designated pastorate, but transitional. So one of the things a transitional pastor, probably a transitional leader of any kind, does is they help an organization, they help a group of people decide who they are and how they want to present who they are to others. I imagine that's true with a business or a church or a nonprofit. That's part of the transition. Look again at who we are and how do we communicate that. And one of the things that churches always want to say, no matter to what degree it's true, is that all are welcome. When we have this conversation of who's welcome, it always begins with the church leaders telling me and church members telling me, oh, everyone's welcome. All are welcome. And we've seen signs like that. We've hung signs like that out front, I believe, although I try to nuance them a little bit sometimes. But we've seen signs like that. All are welcome. And when I have this conversation with churches, including some of you who are listening to this sermon now, I often say, it isn't enough to say all are welcome. For a church, that is not enough. Because all are welcome at the beer distributor across the street, and all are welcome at the tattoo parlor, all are welcome at Steel City, all are welcome at Iron Hill, and most places you go, you're assumed to be welcome. And if anything, churches are worse at welcoming everyone than most places, worse than average in a lot of cases. So churches say everyone's welcome, but you ask an LGBTQ person, did you feel welcome? Was it real? And listen to their answers. It's not reassuring. Or you ask a disabled person, were you welcome at that church? Could you even get in the door? Was it accessible? Could you hear what was being said? Could you understand what was being said? Could you see? Could you find the restroom? Did people accommodate you? Did they give you weird looks or sigh under their breath when they had to spend extra time helping you? Were you welcome? A homeless person walks into the sanctuary for worship. Are they welcome? Or just a really intelligent person who has genuine questions about these doctrines and these dogmas and these teachings, and they really want to know what's going on with this place. Are those questions really welcome? Women who come to a church and want to be in positions of authority, want to be ordained as pastors or priests, want to serve on the board, leading the church, teach a class even. Are they welcome? Are you welcome if you go to a church and they tell you your baptism has to be redone because it wasn't the right kind of baptism the first time? Are you welcome if you go to a church and they find out you're on your second or third marriage and they go, ooh, that's going to be a problem? The problem is that we all think we know already. We think that we're familiar with how the church works. And people who don't come to church also feel like they're familiar with how the church works. And it's already kind of laid out who is welcome and who isn't. And the place that can honestly say, all are welcome here, and mean it. And when you ask people who come to that place and they say, yes, I was welcome there, that kind of church is rare. It just is. In 2021, nobody is going to be running up to us, holding the Bible open to the book of Isaiah, asking us to explain this book to them. And then after a short conversation, they'll be excited to have heard about this Jesus person for the first time in their life, and they're going to beg us to baptize them. This is just not going to happen any longer. This is a dream. Like, Philip's situation is a dream scenario. That would be amazingly easy. And nothing about sharing faith with people I've ever experienced has been anywhere near that easy. Even though I'm sure it was difficult for Philip at the time. Looking at this now in 2021, oh my gosh, that'd be amazing. It's this presumption that makes our job harder than Philip's was. For Philip, everything was brand new. Philip was also a relatively new Christian. He'd only been doing it for a little while. All of his friends, the fellow apostles, they'd only been doing it for a little while. They're figuring out this stuff as they go. And so to invite someone new in when they feel guided by the Holy Spirit, there's no reason not to. Like, let's do it. Why not? Let's invite this guy in. And the early church was like that. It invited in all the people who were at the bottom of Roman society. And so there were tons of slaves, and there are tons of women, and there are tons of foreigners, and people converted from other religions, and all these people were huge in the early church with the first Christians. because there wasn't this presumption. They didn't pretend like they knew. They didn't feel like they knew who belonged and who didn't. This works in secular ways as well, even leaving church aside. Recently, Americans were polled and asked, what is the biggest danger to the United States? What is the biggest danger to our way of life? And they were given a number of options, options like economic collapse, or climate change, or terrorism, or even COVID-19, right? And so, of the people surveyed, over 50% of them all agreed what the number one threat to their way of life was in 2021. And that threat is other Americans. When asked what is the most threatening thing to our way of life, more than half of us said, the rest of you. And then under 50%, you had 20-something percent climate change, 20-something percent was maybe economic collapse or that sort of thing, and then it went down from there, right? But overwhelmingly, more than half said the danger to my way of life is y'all. The way that Christianity usually works is that belonging is very difficult to achieve. I've watched it take generations for people to belong, to pay the entrance fee so that they now belong. The way it often works is that the first thing you have to do is you have to believe. You have to make a profession of faith, and it's got to be the right kind of profession of faith. It's got to tick the boxes doctrinally and dogmatically that are appropriate for that community. This comes up for me when I help people write statements of faith to apply for jobs with faith-based Christian organizations. Or I've talked to people, I've tried to give them advice when they're struggling whether to sign a statement of faith they have to sign before they can work at a faith-based school or organization. And so I would never counsel someone to lie or be deceptive, but you can look at the statement of faith of an organization. You can decide to highlight some things and not mention other things as a way to try to fit in, to try to get in through the door to work there because you feel called to be there. But normally you have to believe first. You have to make a profession of faith, the right kind of profession of faith. And then you have to learn how to behave. So once you've gotten yourself in the door with your profession of faith, now you learn what are our traditions, what are our behaviors, how do we do things, how do we do baptism, how do we do communion, what songs do we sing? When we are in worship, do we stand up? Do we talk or are we quiet? Do we sit in the front or sit in the back? All the trappings that make you fit in with this community, you have to learn those things. And either they teach you directly or you just kind of absorb them. Like, oh, we're standing, oh, we're sitting. We're kneeling, there are kneelers, okay. Oh, there's a prayer book, got it. And you learn all these things. And then once you have all the right beliefs and once you have all the right behaviors, then, hopefully, you get to belong. But that belonging is always in jeopardy. Because you spent so much to earn it, and it can relatively easily be taken away. And so when it comes up that there's a disagreement about doctrine, about teachings, about the beliefs, or someone has a question, or when there's a disagreement about how we're going to do church, what our practices are, it has all this extra weight and anxiety and anger and fear behind it because your belonging is in jeopardy. If you believe the wrong thing, you lose your belonging. If you do the wrong thing, you lose your belonging. This also gives a lot of power to people in authority. Like if I can decide whether you belong based on whether I like your beliefs and your behavior, that's a lot of power that I have. And so you're going to hesitate to question me. You might let me get away with things that I otherwise shouldn't be doing. You might let me do harmful things and not stop me because you fear you'll lose your belonging. what if the process was reversed? What if we began with belonging? With the presumption, which I have expressed, it's no secret this is my preferred method. What if we began with the presumption that everyone belongs? That just as God has told us we belong, despite who we are, despite whatever nonsense we've done, God still tells each of us we belong. And so we say, well, what right do I have to say someone else doesn't belong? That's God's call. If God says I belong, then you belong too. But what if we begin with belonging first? And then when someone belongs and they kind of believe, wow, I really do belong, you are trying to make me welcome, then they're probably going to want to take on the behaviors. As they belong, they'll think, oh, cool, this is a great community. What do they do? How do they do this? How do they worship? How do they do communion? How do they do baptism? How do they sing hymns? I want to do that too because I belong. This is great. This is wonderful. And then as they feel they belong and as they learn to behave in a way that's part of our community, then they're able to believe. The word for belief in the New Testament is the same as the word for trust. They're able to trust because first they belong, and then they're brought into this community and taught the way this community does things, and now they're able to believe. And because we begin with belonging, belonging is never in jeopardy. There isn't all that heat behind questions of, hey, we disagree on a belief. Hey, why don't we look at this behavior and do it a different way? We can just talk about the belief or talk about the behavior in a more calm and open-minded way, I hope, because our belonging isn't in jeopardy. There's no threat that if you get the wrong answer on this quiz, you're out. It's like, no, you belong, but let's talk about these things and work them out together. The Ethiopian eunuch asks Philip, what is there to prevent me from being baptized right now? Why don't you just dunk me immediately? Because this is great. I want to be part of this. And the challenge isn't a challenge of the Ethiopian eunuch. It's not a challenge for God. It's a challenge for Philip. And so Philip has to decide whether this Ethiopian eunuch is going to belong. I think Philip makes the right choice. Belonging can be a matter of life and death. And I'm going to end here with an example of when belonging is a matter of life and death. Now, you might recall, long ago in the before times, when we were just starting up the men's group. And when I was announcing the men's group, I was saying we're going to form a men's group, and any men are welcome, and anyone who identifies as a man is welcome. And I meant it, but there was some nervous laughter, some understandable nervous laughter in the congregation at that point. I expected it. This is the first time I'd sort of spoken this way during a worship service. And I promised myself that I would come back to this issue again, but I know I have to do it slowly. I have to kind of ease people into hearing about this over time, and that's okay. So we have growing acceptance for the L and the G and the B, and also for the Q, I think. We're not there, but growing acceptance over time, over my lifetime, the past 10 years especially. But we still have a lot of issues with the T. In LGBTQ, that T, trans women and trans men, is giving us problems. I don't think it should, but it is. We have bathroom bills being passed. We have, bills that would invade the privacy of children, deciding whether they can use a restroom being passed. Trans panic is still a justifiable homicide in many states, if you didn't know that. It continues to be more dangerous to be just a normal trans person going through your life than to be a frontline soldier or a construction worker or a police officer or a firefighter or any dangerous job or dangerous sounding job that might come to mind. It's about 1 in 12 trans people are killed. Either they kill themselves via suicide or they're murdered for being trans. And I don't know if you know this has been studied by groups like the Trevor Project, that in the life of a trans adolescent, having only one accepting adult can reduce the chances they will commit suicide by 40%. Only one accepting adult, one person in their whole life, of all the people in their lives, one person who says, I see you, I accept who you are, I'm going to use your pronouns without complaining about it or making a deal of it. I affirm you, I accept you, I love you for whoever you are. Tell me who you are, and I accept that. All it takes is one person doing that, and out of 10 trans adolescents, it could save 4 of their lives by itself. Just that tiny offering of belonging is enough to save lives. And there are existing laws and new laws are continually being passed. The most recent fad is to pass anti-trans laws about kids participating in school sports. Even though I have yet to see an example of a trans athlete gaining an advantage or using their status for an advantage in sports. I mean, think about it. Name a district or state or national champion athlete who's trans. I don't think you can. Not even Google will help you here. People who vote for these laws and sign these laws can't give you an example of what problem they're trying to solve. But what these laws do is they tell every single trans person, you don't belong, you don't belong, you don't belong. They don't solve any actual problems. They don't keep anyone safer, but they do communicate a lack of belonging loud and clear. And sometimes that means that belonging can be a life and death issue. But even when it's not, even when belonging is not a question of life and death, like Philip, we are still the people who can either put up barriers between people and God or offer belonging. Amen.